Joining me live in the studio is Liberal Senator for the ACT, Minister for the Pacific, Zed Seselja. Minister, thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Tom describes it as roadmap envy in the ACT, that there wasn't a lot of detail. That's your criticism of it as well. Have you had that sort of feedback from business?
Yeah, and look, it's not just business. I mean, I think there's pretty widespread frustration now. Yesterday, there was an expectation that we would get a bit of a pathway forward, whereas all we got was 4 more weeks of lockdown with no real end in sight, because it's not clear even that the lockdown would end then. Hopefully it will. Hopefully it'll end before then. But certainly what the frustration is we're not seeing what's going to happen for school kids, except for year 12s and year 11s. So beyond that, there's a long wait for most school kids. So parents are frustrated. Obviously, businesses, people need to understand too that this lockdown that's now going to be at least 9 weeks is significantly more stringent than a lot of other lockdowns in the country. I mean, we had construction shut down for 4 weeks. Almost no other jurisdiction has done that. We've got car dealerships who can't do click and collect at the moment. Very frustrated. They can't get their product out the door. They want to do it safely. They can do it safely. Businesses who can operate online with just a few staff sending it out all over the country, they're shut down if they've got more than 20 employees. So there's a lot of frustration from parents. There's obviously older Canberrans who are isolated and lonely, young people who are suffering from mental health issues, and yes, businesses who just want to get back and work, but to do it safely, and many of those could do that right now.
The Chief Minister says he is following the national plan, and that when the ACT gets over and above that 80% threshold and the 70% mark, that he needs to look at the national plan, which is that the broader numbers across the country have to also get to those marks. And he argued today, essentially, it's important we do that given we're an island, essentially, within another state and the capital territory. So a lot of people coming in and out, he wants to ensure they've been vaccinated too.
Sure. Well, first thing is we're getting higher rates of vaccination in the ACT, and that's a great thing, and we want to see that continue. New South Wales also has very high rates of vaccination. They're hitting 80% first dose at the moment, I understand, and they're a little bit behind us on second dose, but both our jurisdictions, so where we're surrounded by New South Wales, those vaccination rates are very good for both of us. But what I would say is the national plan doesn't mandate that you have to have really, really strict lockdowns at 70%. It says, sure, you may well be using lockdowns at 70%, but it'll depend obviously on case numbers and a whole range of other things. So there's no mandate to have the strongest possible lockdowns and keep businesses shut down and keep families away from each other and keep kids out of school. Those are still choices that can be made by the ACT government based on the health advice. And I would say that one thing people are probably crying out for is, as they talk about the health advice, and we don't want to see people in hospital with COVID, we don't want to see our hospitals overwhelmed. Of course, that's a really important health goal. We all share that. But also, it'd be good if they could reveal the modelling on how young people's mental health is affected by these kind of shutdowns. I mean, most kids in Canberra, as I understand it now, will have at least 11 weeks out of school. That's a full term out of school. That has consequences for their education, for their socialisation. So there are real consequences for that. And this is where, as our vaccination rates go up, we do need to see, I think, a better calibration, a better balance there.
Yeah, indeed. And do you understand, though, why Andrew Barr might be more cautious given what we're seeing just up the road in Sydney?
I think it's right to be cautious, but that doesn't mean that you don't allow things to happen that clearly are safe, And when we look at some of those businesses that are still closed, I mean, there's really no justification. I mean, we're told that if you've got more than 20 employees in certain businesses, you can't reopen, but those businesses would operate with less than 20 employees because they would have a skeleton staff who come in, do the job, ship the products. Now, as it is, people are buying those same products from Sydney and having them delivered here to Canberra. Now, that doesn't make any sense either. So, it has to be common sense, and I think people feel at the moment there's no plan out and there's no real justification for some of the measures. They get that there has to be some measures. No one's saying have nothing. No one's arguing that, and I'm not arguing that.
But some clarity.
Clarity and I think some movement. I think given the high vaccination rates, I think the expectation yesterday would have been there would have been some recognition of that, and either in a social sense or an economic sense, some freeing up.
You're also Minister for the Pacific and International Development. A big change yesterday for the Pacific Labor scheme and also the seasonal worker program. They've played quite an important role in the ag sector during this COVID period, haven't they?
Yeah, huge. We restarted. Those schemes were suspended early on in COVID. We restarted them in September of last year. We've brought in over 11,000 Pacific workers under that scheme, and some had already remained. So there's over 15,000 Pacific workers in Australia right now, and that is obviously very, very important, particularly to our agricultural sector, but also in other areas. And what we've announced...
It's important to the region as well in terms of remittances going home, isn't it?
Huge. There are some nations where remittances are the biggest factor in their economy. So obviously tourism has been decimated, and we want to see over the next few months, over time, as things get better, obviously we want to see travel resume. We want to see that happening, but in the short term, this is critical to those economies and it's critical to our economy, because without these Pacific workers, it's very difficult for our farmers to operate. We're going to bring another 1,600 in the next month, and we've got a goal from August to have an extra 12,500. We're about 2,000 into that 12,500 goal. So another 10,000 by March is what we're aiming for. And the reforms we announced make it easier for employers. They mean they can double the cap. Market testing lasts for 12 months rather than 6 months. The age cap of 45 years is removed. There's a whole range of common sense changes that'll make it easier. But going forward, it's going to be continuing to work with states and territories to make sure that either quarantine or some other measures as we move to next phases of the national plan, when we get to 70 and 80%, allow people to come in.
It's not far off, is it, for those, as you said, those benchmarks? Sydney passed 70% for the first dose.
Yeah, they're at 80.
Sorry, 80%, I should have said. They're at 80% first dose now. And the ACT just behind that in terms of first dose, over 50% now in double dose.
Indeed.
How soon would you like to see that travel corridor open, not just to New Zealand, but to Fiji and other nations, as you said quite rightly, decimated in terms of their tourism industry?
Well, I think pretty soon, and I think those are discussions we'll be having in the coming weeks as we look at what this next phase looks like. Fiji, for instance, has announced that they will be opening up to other countries to come in, I think, around November. So obviously we may not make the decision right when they open up, but I think we'd want to be in the game pretty soon after, because obviously a lot of Australians would like to go there. It needs to be done in the right way. There'll be all sorts of rules around it. But also, Fiji has very high vaccination rates at the moment, 96, 97% first dose. So, look, the situation is going to change rapidly over these next few weeks and months, and I'm keen, obviously, to see it happen. It's great for Australians and it's great for our region as well.
Zed Seselja, thank you as always.
Thanks very much, Kieran.
Minister for the Pacific and International Development.